right. It's my pleasure to invite up and introduce our darshan, our guest speaker tonight. It happens to be one of the presidents, one of the co-presidents of Beth Amen. This is somebody who has been a member of our congregation for over 50 years. Bob Bauer is going to be speaking to us tonight. We are so fortunate. And Bob is active in Beth Am in so many wonderful and important ways. And the way that I've gotten to know Bob best is through his work with our Chevra Kadisha. This is our burial society, and it's supposed to sort of be a secret society. But it's made up of the very most wonderful and kind people, in many of the most wonderful and kind people in our congregation, doing this very holy work of helping to prepare people for their final burial. And so I'd like to, with a lot of honor and respect, invite up Bob Bauer to be our darshan this evening. Shabbat shalom, and welcome, Bob. Here. Let's see if we can. Good.
Thank you, Cantor. So if you could start the video just to get a feeling of the mood of what this Dosh is going to be like. Hopefully it'll turn on with the sound in. So this was a song that was written in actually 1983, and it was written by one of the best-known lyricists in Israel, who wrote over 1,250 songs. And he wrote this song at the time of the Lebanon War. And when he wrote it, it was very controversial and never really became that well known. But since October 7th, it now has a whole different resonance. And I'm not a bleeding heart Zionist by any means, but I've been to Israel probably every decade for the last 50 years, when my kids studied there, and other times just with Ralston and I right after the '67 war. But this time was really different. This time, when I got off the plane at Ben Gurion Airport on the 4th of July for a 3-week visit, I was surrounded by banners and signs. They proclaimed, "Am Yisrael Chai," and "Bring them home now." There were pictures of hostages, and it was just different this time. I was going there without any itinerary, just to find out what it was like. I wanted to engage as many Israelis as I could in as many different settings as I could, in order to get somehow a perspective that I might be able to bring back for you today on what it's like after October 7th. And I came back not just knowing and feeling what it's like for the Israelis, but also what it means for us. And so I've had a deep concern about how do we engage young people. Being on the board now as the co-president of Beth, I'm really deeply worried about how we engage young people who have just a seismic different view of Israel and a different experience of what Israel is. How could I understand and what could I bring back that might help us engage a whole new generation of people to love Israel? So tonight I'm going to try to communicate a sense of this gestalt that I saw in Israel, share some personal reflections, and certainly sort of what it means to both, again, Americans and Israelis. And the thing is, it's very complicated. Everything in Judaism is complicated, but this especially feels complicated. There's so many different contradictory forces and no simple answer, but there is a vision. And that vision is that American and Israeli Jews can embrace each other as a family. For it is written in Genesis 32:29, we are all the people of Israel. But let me begin by illustrating how complex Israel is today. I was in Sufa, which is a small town that's about a mile from the Gaza border, just southeast of the Rafah crossing. And we were there with a couple of dozen Orthodox couples and some Israelis. We purchased food and we're preparing a barbecue for the soldiers. And while we were preparing the barbecue, a couple of 19 or 20-year-old girls came over, young women, and they were medics, and they had been brought in that night in order to support the troops that were then going to go out on a mission the next day in Gaza. And they told us about the plan that they were going to go across and they were going to go into Khan Yunis, and it was like, wait a minute, this must be a secret. But actually, these things are not secrets, as those of you who follow the news know, because they broadly tell the Palestinians where they're going to go and what they're going to do. And in this case, it was particularly interesting to me that overcame the commander of all the forces that had been assembled from the Air Force and the Army for this occasion and this battle. And he was gray-haired and probably in his mid-50s from having been through too many of these. And he started to tell us about having to go into Khan Yunis again because now Hamas had restaged themselves, this time in the safe zone. It was just west of the city. And then he said something that really struck me that I didn't expect. He said, quote, we must conduct the war in the most humane way possible, and we must minimize the nightmares of our soldiers should they, for God forbid, kill some innocent men, women, and children. Now, the intensity of this setting was just sort of mind-boggling to me because just the day before, I'd been at the beach in Caesarea, and I saw the same kind of 18, 19, 20-year-old kids who this time were playing volleyball and just living life. And everywhere I went in Israel that wasn't in that narrow corridor in the north, south, or east where there were battles, people were just living their lives normally. It didn't matter if I was at offices and labs, at tech startups, innumerable coffee shops or restaurants, opening night of the Jerusalem Film Festival where there were 5,000 other Israelis that was in Sultan's Pool in Jerusalem. It was nearly impossible to sense any activities that were outside what one would expect as a normal, peaceful life. And everywhere there were contrasts. At the Machan Yehuda shook. There were people distributing wristbands that said, bring them home now, and also, don't stop until it's done. When I visited the Nova Festival, which today is now a memorial to the 364 young people who were slaughtered there, that same evening, I took a different bus and went with a group of people to the closed area on the West Bank, Area C, by a man named Rabbi Arik Asherman, who founded Torah Tzedek. So every day, there are busloads of Israelis and Israeli citizens and soldiers coming to the Nova site so they can experience the necessity of destroying Hamas. And at the same time, every morning at 5:30, Rabbi Asherman told us, he and his volunteers go into Area C, which is under Israeli control by the military, and they go to protect Arab shepherds who cannot get water unless they're protected from the settlers who are trying to drive them off the land. It's a very complicated place. And today, the only thing that seems different from daily life is that now the normal includes weekly demonstrations in Tel Aviv, marches to the Prime Minister's residence in Jerusalem that I was able to join one weekend, and also vigils of groups singing, like you see from this concert video that we saw, that today has had 3.6 million views. There's a clear demarcation of life before October 7th and after October 7th. And I believe, as do many others, that in the annals of Jewish trauma, October 7th will go down as a seismic turning point in our collective history, both for Israelis, and I'm going to explain to you why I think also for Americans, American Jews. So let me explain. Yehuda Kurtzner of the Shalom Hartman Institute proposes that the events of October 7th shattered the prevailing post-1948 dogma that governed the lives of Jews both here in the US and in Israel. We believed three things. One, that Israel changed history and now there was a safe haven for Jews. And two, we had allies that shared our values. And three, that peace in Israel was possible. Well, for Israelis on October 7th, this is an existential crisis. When it comes to safety, the founding of the State of Israel failed in its basic mission to change the history with the most powerful army in the region. In fact, when you see the words that are being used to describe October 7th, we now hear about it was a pogrom. It was the most people killed since the Holocaust. The days when Jews were victims, we now talk in the same language. And the slaughtering of hundreds of people in their own homes and on the fields where they gather, that feels like history repeating itself. So for Israelis, safety is a difficult thing. Number two, allies. You know, all the countries that once were allies, either because they actually wanted to make peace or they were just pragmatic, they're nowhere to be found. They've turned against Israel at the International Court of Justice, terminated economic trade with Israel, and Israel is scrambling in order to find other ways to keep its economy going. And third, peace. Well, I heard over and over again that Hamas didn't just want to kill Israelis. They didn't want to just recapture their land. They actually were interested in slaughtering, raping, and defiling Jews because they were Jews. And those terrorists on October 7th, they had maps. The maps were made by non-Hamas Gazans who worked in the kibbutzim and detailed the people and the layout of every living quarter in those kibbutzes, down to which ones had potentially dangerous dogs. It didn't matter that there were peace activists in those kibbutzes. They were Jews. And when I went to the Kerem Shalom kibbutz, which is only 30 yards from the border with Gaza and Egypt, there was clearly a sense that something was different. Peace with the Arabs just seemed to be impossible. And tragically, the most tragic thing of all of this is that for some of the Israelis I met, they now see no difference between Arabs that are in Gaza, the West Bank, or even Israeli Arabs. There is a profound distrust that will take generations to change. But what's this like for us in America and for American Jews after October 7th? Well, that's an interesting thing that I've reflected on since I've been back for a couple of weeks. You know, over those weeks, I kept hearing a rising chorus of alarms from my generation and my kids' generation. And what did they say? I hope Kamala Harris doesn't choose Josh Shapiro as VP. You know, that's really interesting because many of us are old enough to remember when another Orthodox Jew, a quarter century ago, was chosen by Al Gore, Joe Lieberman. There was some concern that maybe the ticket wouldn't be as electable because he was a Jew. But the events of since October 7th, things feel much, much more concerning. What is it about those events, and why is it that we feel differently now about our own existential place in American society as Jews? So I want to review those same boundaries that Kurtzner said and applied to Israelis. While the details of our narratives are different in Israel and America, they are really no less profound, I posit, because those safeguards of safety, allies, and peace are the things that allowed us to assimilate over the last 75 years into American society, and they're now under attack, or at least they're significantly weakened. Let me explain. For safety, according to the ADL, anti-Semitic incidents in the U.S. skyrocketed 360% in the aftermath of the attacks on October 7th. Beyond just increasing the need for security guards at our synagogues, there's sort of an assumption that we had that's no longer true, that Jews are as safe as any other American group. Do we still feel that way today? And the very presence of Israel as an insurance policy, a safe haven for diaspora Jews, the systemic failure of the government and the army and everyone associated in Israel kind of calls that into question for American Jews. Allies, number two. You know, following October 7th, we American Jews sort of felt alone in our trauma. After 11 innocent lives were extinguished at the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh in 2018, there was an outpouring of support for American Jews. But where were our allies on October 7th after 1,200 Jews were massacred? Jews marched in huge numbers just 4 years ago for Black Lives Matter. But on the 8th of October, the Black Lives group in Chicago had put up a celebratory poster with pictures of terrorists and paragliders. Where were the voices of reason during the river to the sea protests that questioned the right of Jews to have a homeland? And peace. Since the signing of the Oslo Accords at our White House 30 years ago, successive administrations have pushed for peace. Well, in my personal view, and I think many others, we as optimistic liberal Americans had a vision that a demilitarized Palestinian state living in peace next to Israel was certainly going to be possible, hopefully in our lifetime. That's pretty shattered by the brutality of the Hamas invasion and the subsequent violence now that's going on in the West Bank by some Palestinians and Israeli settlers. So it's pretty clear that the changing American Jewish experience has been accelerated by events on October 7th. And I hate to say it, but once again, one thing that comes to my mind is the phrase that was coined by Shlomo Aleichem in 1920 in New York, Schwer zu sein a Yid, it's hard to be a Jew. So for both Israeli and American Jews, the events of October 7th are a trauma that destabilizes what we all thought was our golden age of collective Jewish story. We can't escape the simple fact that the same foundational principles that governed all Jewish lives for the past 75 years of safety, allies, and peace were shaken to the core, whether in Israel or the diaspora. We Jews have a clear fundamental background of relatedness no matter where we live. So what does this realization, this darkness, this fear, what do we do about it? And how does it feel for us here at Beth Am? You know, we're a people of hope, and yet when we find darkness, we have to look somewhere and we have to think about what's possible. So I'm going to tell you one final story, and that's the story of a Friday night being at the beach, this time in Tel Aviv, and the sun is going down. And it's 7 o'clock. The lifeguards who are watching all the people having a good time at the beach, he says in English and in Hebrew that he's closing up for the day and to please be careful when he goes swimming. And then he says, Am Yisrael Hai. And I found that particularly moving as a Jew there. But there are other things that actually found even more positive and exciting to me. I can't get out of my head or shake hearing the statements I hear it everywhere. Thank you for being here, Bob. I really appreciate it. That sentiment I heard no matter where I went in Israel, whether it be the founders of the tech startups in Tel Aviv, or the local home guards in Sderot, which was attacked brutally during October 7th, or the shopkeepers on Ben Yehuda Street, or the Israeli volunteer who taught me how to tie tzitzit that I volunteered to do for the Army Katans so that they could have their tzitzit at the front. Or the young family in their home in Modi'in who had a 15-year-old girl who was going into the army shortly, and I asked them how they felt, and they said they felt proud. Or the mother of the son who that day was actually in a tank in Rafah. Or the Harvard-trained lawyer with his kids in the park who had made Aliyah 4 years before. Or even the supporter of Benjamin Netanyahu on the train to Tel Aviv, who told me how appreciative he was that I came as an American in support of Israel. So all these people, to a person, regardless of politics or persuasion, they treated me one way, which you could only use the term family. Because we are an extended family. I was treated with care, and dare I say, like a brother. Indeed, the model of a single, large, diverse, and sometimes crazy-making family embodies the shared peoplehood of American and Israeli Jews, even though the details of our own realities can be seen quite different. And what does this all mean for Beth Am here and what we can do about it, and hopefully attract those young people? You know, as Jews, we never accept the world as it is, and we don't just pray for a better world. We are people committed to making the world a better place, no matter how difficult the task may seem, nor how small the progress may appear. We take action to improve the human condition in our community and beyond, and that's what we do at Beth Am. We have over 100 groups of committed congregants working in myriad ways to improve the lives of people, ranging from helping mourners who need support at a time of loss of a loved one, or supporting the plight of farm workers on the coast. At Beth Am Men, we collect tzedakah at every meeting in support of the congregation's monthly choice for a worthy organization. And this is the way that we can engage our young people, I posit. They may be questioning and they may be uncomfortable being a Jew after October 7th. But whatever their interests, whatever your interests and concern, Beth Am is a community within the larger Jewish, American, and Israeli community dedicated to making the world a better place for all people. And as mishpacha, we must, as Hartman puts it, ensure that Judaism is a compelling force for good in the 21st century. So after October 7th, what Jewish peoplehood that binds us together, what is it that we can take away from this? And what can we use going forward? Well, there's a statement that was made by Donnell Hartman, the head of the Hartman Institute, that I found particularly compelling. And that is, no matter our citizenship, our race, our political affiliation, sexual orientation, or any other part of our complex identity, the Jewish part of that complex identity tells us that we have a responsibility for our people and requires us to be a blessing to all humankind. For young and old alike, that's a roadmap for revitalizing Beth Am and having a better life. It will take us from where we are to where we ought to be. Am Yisrael Chai.